So Venerable Children is in Asia, and so we're going to have the next few weeks teachings by the community here. And we decided to talk about the 6 far-reaching practices, as these are, since we're talking about paths and grounds, when we are all not hanging out in meditative equipoise on emptiness, when we get up off the cushion, this is what we're doing. So, since it takes eons to figure all this out, we thought we'd focus on it for a few weeks. So, tonight we'll start with, I'll set a little bit of a context for the 6 far-reaching practices, and then talk about generosity a little bit. And so let's start by setting our motivation. So, if you're anything like me, you probably don't think too much about your future lives. It's quite easy to not just let the mind go there and to be kind of passé about all that. But then when we start studying and seeing what creates the conditions to practice the Dharma, and we look at how precious that is and how rare, we can see that we need to kind of wake up to each day to create the causes to be able to do this in the future. And it's not very hard to see that even in our own lifetime we haven't had very good translations into English. Even in my lifetime there were very few. And so we really have an incredible opportunity, and we want to keep this going. So tonight, when we're thinking about these teachings, let's set it in our mind to try to increase our understanding, and also to use these teachings to invigorate our practice. So, as we all want to be happy and don't want to suffer, let's think about creating the causes for all of these 6 far-reaching practices, which contain the entire path to awakening, so that we can benefit everyone that we meet in this lifetime and all future lifetimes. So may we all become enlightened and be able to do that. So these are teachings that kind of, I think, expand the mind quite a bit. And when we sometimes hear about them, we might be even a little fearful of them, talking about giving away your body and such. It's kind of like not on my list of things to do today. And also when we delve into these teachings, we see that we need to practice them for a long time. But the teachings also tell us, and we can see from the way our own mind works, that the things that we become familiar with and really spend time with, get acquainted with, become much easier. And so it's also said that these will spontaneously, we'll be able to, these attainments will come spontaneously as we become familiar with them. So it's just a matter of kind of putting ourselves through the paces. And also if we don't, even though the teachings, I think on generosity, they're a bit of a stretch, for me anyway. But if we don't do that, if we don't make the effort to familiarize ourselves, then as with many other things in our life, we'll never really attain them. So, you know, we want to familiarize ourselves. And I think the thing that draws me to this also is the fact that these 6 far-reaching practices contain all that we need in the path. And as Geshe Sopa says, they actually help us with all the problems that come up. And so, you know, they're really like, they are the method. And so as we study them and things come up in our practice, they're very, very useful. So when the Buddha talked about the causes and conditions to become enlightened, he said it was basically three things: great compassion, bodhicitta, and the perfect method. So we had teachings recently on bodhicitta. And to understand these, when we think about the 6 far-reaching practices, we always want to keep in mind that the basis for all of them is compassion. And so this great compassion, although it's like the cause, in a sense, or the root, maybe, for all of this omniscient wisdom to grow, to become a Buddha. So this compassion desires to free all beings from suffering, and it also takes the responsibility to do that. And so this is the cause of bodhicitta, and bodhicitta is the cause to become enlightened. So we've spent time on that the last few, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So now we're on to the perfect method, which is what completes this set of causes for enlightenment. And so these 6 far-reaching practices are just that. So we don't really practice them as a far-reaching practice until we've really have bodhicitta spontaneously and continuously. But just think about what that mind would be like. Is quite inspiring, because it really, that kind of mind would really dominate your life. It would inform really every aspect of your day, all your thoughts, and all the things that you're doing. And so as we approach these teachings tonight, this kind of thought of bodhicitta, we want to just imagine that we have that as we listen to these teachings. Imagine that we're on the bodhisattva path now, and that here we are, we're ready to really engage in Mahayana practice. So that's kind of I think, useful to set ourselves in that state of mind. So then, if we have this aspiring bodhicitta, that's great, but it won't get you enlightened. You've got to set out and engage in the method. And this method has to be both unmistaken and complete, with all the causes and conditions. And so that method is to practice together both wisdom and method. So the method and wisdom sides of the path, you have to have both. The method side is what we might think of as the collection of merit. It's like this aspiring type of mind. We inspire by ourselves to have this intention to give, to not harm, to practice all these practices. And this aspect of creating a mind like that is very helpful for the wisdom side of the path too, because it helps the mind to become purified and enriches it. So when we do that to our mind, when we have this is something I didn't actually used to believe in so much, but I see it as the case, that when we do these kind of activities with the kind of motivation, with wholesome and constructive motivations, it's like we're making the mind is like a field that's rough, and you're cultivating it, and then you can plant the seed of wisdom in it. And so it helps your wisdom to grow. You'll understand things better when you study by having more merit. But it's actually the collection of wisdom, or the wisdom side of the path, that determines our progress. Because as we've been studying in these bodhisattva grounds, it's during meditative equipoise on emptiness that actual realizations occur. And as you go from one ground to another, it's actually during that time. So when we complete both of these collections of merit and wisdom, then we become a Buddha with the truth body and the form body. And so the merit and wisdom are the practices that they expand into the 6 far-reaching practices. And those are generosity, ethical discipline, patience, joyous effort, meditative stabilization, and wisdom. So tonight we'll focus on the first. So our motivation for engaging in these practices is the bodhicitta. We want to lead our life as a bodhisattva does. And the deeds are the means to do that. And this is how we free ourselves, and then we can teach others to be free of their suffering and to be happy with a permanent kind of happiness. And so this is how bodhisattvas help others, by their teaching them and by their example. And Dharmakirti said that in order to destroy suffering, compassionate ones apply themselves to the methods. If you don't know the cause for creating a result, it's difficult to explain it to others. So it's just plain common sense. Well, we have to understand these things with our own minds and our own experience. And so these practices are called far-reaching. That term, which is in Sanskrit is paramita, has this connotation of going beyond. And so what are we going beyond here? Is we're going beyond cyclic existence, and we're going to Buddhahood. And so this is, now we've eliminated all the obscurations and developed all of our good qualities to their fullest. So as we do these practices, it's a process of ripening our mind. So each of these practices is actually a state of mind. It's easy to think that they're like more like behaviors, but they're actually, all of them are more, first and foremost, a state of mind. They're not the external behaviors. And so as we practice these and achieve these, this will accomplish the welfare for all sentient beings. It will accomplish our own welfare, and it will help us to have a precious human rebirth in the future, so we can continue to practice. And for generosity in particular, by being generous, we will have the resources we need in future lives. Because you can't be, if you're too poor, that gets in the way of practicing the Dharma. You need to have a certain number of requisites to have the leisure and the time and the resources to be able to practice. So just in terms of the function of generosity, it helps us to have the resources that we need. So all of us sitting here now have done this, have been generous in the past to the point that we have the resources now to practice. And if you look around in the world, you can see that many people do not have that situation that we have. And in this way, if you think about the results of these practices, that we engage in them to get results, we can see that even if one is lacking, then in the future we won't really have the opportunity to continue practicing in future lives. Or they'll be limited in some way. And we run up probably against that now in our own practice. Falling asleep during teachings, and just all the kind of things that we run into, you know. So these are all the things that we're creating the causes for now in terms of our future. So I'm just going to give like some of the benefits of the six practices in terms of this kind of way of thinking. So, for instance, just getting started in a practice. If we're attached to wealth, then we can that would actually inhibit us possibly from practicing the Dharma. We'd spend our time running a business or something, you know, and put all our energy into that. But if we can become generous, then we'll have more of a mind that wants to share our resources, and we won't have so much attachment to wealth. Or if you have attachment to family or home, if you engage in ethical conduct, especially in the monastic life where you kind of renounce the home life, then again, you have created more time in your life in order to practice. Or you could see, even if as a layperson, if you're involved in a lot of activities that are unethical, your Dharma practice will suffer because you won't have the mindset, and you'll have all kinds of obstacles coming up in your practice. So the first two, generosity and ethical conduct, can actually help us to even adopt the path. So, but we could still abandon this path, and this is where fortitude comes in. Because if we develop a lot of resentment, say we resent people's lack of appreciation or respect, or people's behavior gets on our nerves, just any of the things that come up in your Dharma practice that could kind of, what's the word, railroad you? Not sure if that's the exact expression. Huh? Derail, there it is, derail you. Yeah, so this is why we need to develop this patience or fortitude so that we can undergo all of the kind of hardships in our practice strengthen ourselves to be able to do that. Also, if we develop joyous effort, then we won't have discouragement that can come up, which does come up in our practice sometimes when you look at how long things take and the depth of the realizations, you know. And so if we develop like fortitude and joyous effort, those two together, then we're certainly going to keep going on the path, because we'll have a way to work with our mind. And so we'll have a lot of strength to continue, and that can make the mind more cool and just kind of soothe it. But even with those, our virtue that now we're living in a more virtuous way could completely go to waste, and we could have like not much in the way of results from our practice if our mind is always distracted, because we'll just sit on the cushion and what are we going to do? You know, our mind's going from here to there, sense objects, all these different thoughts and emotions that always come up. So all that kind of takes away from the constructiveness. So that we lessen with meditative stabilization, so that we can keep our mind focused on a virtuous object. And this will help us then to penetrate the Dharma, the meaning of the Dharma, and integrate it. And then if we don't, we still can have difficulties and not really make the best use of our time if we don't understand and practice properly. So kind of having mistaken intelligence, you might say. So the wisdom, studying the wisdom side of the path will then help us in that regard. So we can actually discern what the path is and what it isn't, and adopt what we need to adopt, and abandon what we need to abandon in terms of that type of wisdom. But then also the wisdom, so that wisdom is what guides our actions of body, speech, and mind. But then there's also the wisdom of understanding reality, of course. So all of these practices, you can see, are things that can help us with the various problems that come up in our practice. And so we want to take them to heart very personally, and look at our experience and study and find things that will help with the different things that come up. Because that's just the way it is. But at the same time, we engage in all of them, but they're actually done in an order. They're actually done starting with generosity, and then you move through them. So although we study them all and we cultivate all of them, the first one is easier to cultivate, and it goes in that order. And this is how it's taught. And why would that be? Why is it that generosity would precede ethical conduct? Well, if you think about it, it's not too hard to figure it out. If you're really attached to things, and you're so attached to things that you're greedy and getting all kinds of behavior and troubles, then you're not going to really abandon non-virtuous activities. I mean, if you have a lot of attachment, it will very easily just steal and lie and do all kinds of things. So this kind of letting go of this attachment to things kind of soothes that, and so then it's easier to practice ethical conduct. So we start with generosity. And we might even have attachment to like our friends and our family and do things to protect them that interferes with our ethical conduct. So by cultivating our generous heart and this taking delight in giving and wanting to share our resources or whatever, this kind of attachment will decrease. And then as you go through the practices, each one builds to the next one in the same way. You need ethical conduct in order to have fortitude. And that's in the sense that if we have ethical conduct, then we can control our afflictions better. And then with that ability, we can remain more calm in the face of harm. And then we need this fortitude in order to have joyous effort. Because with this calm mind in the face of difficulties, it's easier to have a joyful mind, because our mind is more internally calm, and then we can maintain joyous effort much easier. And then joyous effort is needed to develop meditative stabilization. And why is that? Because it's so hard to do. It doesn't come easily. It doesn't come quickly. It takes a lot of effort over a long period of time. And so we need to have a joyous mind in order to do that. And then, of course, we need this meditative stabilization in order to develop this sharp and clear wisdom that penetrates the meaning of any topic, and especially the nature of reality. So this is kind of how they all fit together. And that's kind of the context of what we'll be talking about in the next weeks. And tonight we're going to focus on generosity, this mind of giving. And if you think about, in your own experience, just think about times where you've had, this kind of mind state. It's quite delightful. It's a joyous mind. You're taking delight. There's no should or anything like that. And there's not this pain of clutching and clinging, being miserly. So it's really a nice way to start, because it's joyful to do, if you can get in touch with it. And then coming back to our mindset for the night of thinking about what it would be like to the generosity of a bodhisattva. They experience supreme joy. And why? Because they see how they're benefiting others. And just look in your own experience when you've been able to be of benefit, how the mind is quite joyful. It's not anything you have to force. There's no sadness or fear or any sense of loss after they give. They just have happiness. And it's profound and fulfilling. And why is that? Because it's completely removed from any kind of self-centeredness. And it's directed towards benefiting all beings. So, as we kind of think about what this mind is like, let's let it be very vast. So, the next part of this talk is from Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings from the Lam Rim. And he has it 2 chapters, and this is half of the first one, so to speak. And it's really kind of just the beginning. It's really how to train in the perfection of generosity, what it is, what generosity is, and how just to get going, how to begin. And that's what I wanted to focus on tonight. And I think it's a bit of a stretch. So keep your bodhisattva caps on. So he starts off with, what is the nature of generosity? So this is an intention. So it's a mental state. It accompanies the bodhisattva's disinterested non-attachment to all their possessions and their body. So just imagine that you have this, that you're not attached to your possessions and your body at all. And then motivated by this, all the physical and verbal actions that they do of giving the things to be given. So I think that's the things to be given is what comes later in these chapters, and I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But just getting the mind to that kind of place is what the talk is more about tonight. So really what we're talking about here is an attitude that's very generous, and it's easy to be generous because you're not attached. And then it's also the physical and verbal actions that we do motivated by that kind of mind. And then this has to be understood, and that really it is really the mental side of it that we're talking about. It's not the physical or the verbal side in terms of bringing it even to completion, complete perfection. If it was, then you could say, well, look, there's still all these poor people in the world, so the Buddhas, how could they ever have perfected generosity? Because people are still poor. And so the Shantideva and others make it very clear that you're perfecting this. It's a mental thing. It's your intention. It's not contingent on actually removing people's poverty. So you may, the poverty will still exist, and you can have completed this perfection. So how will this come about? The perfection of it. You completely destroy your stingy clinging to all that you own, your body, your resources, and even the roots of virtue, it's like your merit. And then you completely condition your mind to giving them away to living beings from the depths of your heart. And not only giving away all these objects and possessions, but also the merit of even just the giving. So it's kind of twofold. And the first part, this destroying the clinging, attachment is the same as what the fundamental vehicle arhat, or what's the word I'm looking for? Hearers, there we go, hearers and solitary realizers do. They completely give up this attachment. That they have completely given it up. But the difference here that makes it a far-reaching attitude is that we're also, besides giving things up, we're also completely conditioning your mind to give everything away. So they've given up the attachment, but they haven't trained the mind in this kind of generosity that just wants to give. So as we go about this, we first go about generating this perfection of generosity, the practice of it. We first generate the different ways that we give, like the intentions, and then we steadily increase this generosity. And this is even regardless of if we're actually giving things away to others. So I think that's an important point. So like even when the Buddha told that one person who was very stingy to take a carrot and put it from one hand to the other, that person was learning how to increase their generosity, even though he didn't give anything to anyone else. But it's that kind of attitude. And then, you know, that person started with that, and so then they steadily increase that, and then you find it in your own life that as you kind of start to be generous and you really learn what it is, rather than everything being like a business transaction where you're getting and receiving all the time. That's not generosity, that's a business transaction. And so this giving from the heart, this delightful feeling, is real different from that. And once you get in touch with that, it becomes very easy to give because it's so joyful. Whereas anything that's like, you know, where you're expecting things, or you're, you know, it's almost like a wanting something in return, or I don't know, anything that has the strings tied to it. That's not really generosity. So to start this practice, how to begin this developing, this perfection of generosity, is what most of the talk is about. So that was kind of like, almost like the definition of generosity. And now this is, how do you get going? So, so what we want to do is we want to not only clear away this tight-fistedness that we have, this stinginess that prevents us from giving things away, but we also want to, from the depths of our heart, have the intention to give away everything to others. And to do this, we have to think about the advantages and disadvantages. That's the whole bulk of this part, the faults of holding on to things and the benefits of giving them away. And so this is what Lama Tsongkhapa goes into here. And he does it mostly by bringing up citations from different texts and then commenting on them. So if you think about the attachment that we have to our body and to our life, and I think for me, the reason I kind of got interested in this topic, you know, there's a lot of ways you could teach this topic, was just being sick recently. So I'm not so infatuated with youth. I'm not so infatuated with health and vigor this week. So it makes me kind of really look at the body more. And so I think that's why I kind of tuned into these things and wanting to stretch my mind a little bit this way. So think about what this one sutra says. These childish people are attached to this rotting body and to this rushing life force, both of which lack independence. They're changing without any control, and are like a dream or a magician's illusion. So these unintelligent beings do terrible things and fall under the power of unwholesome activity, until easily carried off by the chariot of death's lord, proceed to unbearable hells. So this is, to me, that thing about the intoxication with health and the body and youth and all that, and not really, you know, with having this life and everything, and not really putting it in the context of what really is our situation. It's the mind that is caught in the four distortions. So if we really view our body as unclean, which it is, I mean, look at any part of it. There's no part of it, if you set it on, you know, if I took something from the inside and set it in your hands, wouldn't you want to have a pair of gloves on? I think so. The deeper I go on my body, or anything that comes out of it, I think you'd want gloves, and maybe a nose plug. So it's not so clean. And then viewing life as rushing like a mountain cascade. And, you know, we just have this thing of permanence. We don't think that death is around the corner. It's, you know, there's no certainty that any of us are going to be here tomorrow. There is no certainty of that. Life just rushes like a cascade down a mountain. But, you know, oh, who wants to think about that? That's our attachment. So both of these don't have, we don't have control of them, you know. It's the thing about karma. And they're not things that are so solid that we can hold on to and pin our hopes on, because they're both going to end. So being attached to these is kind of fruitless, and it's easy to be attached to our body and our life, of course, is the biggest attachments we probably have, and it can dominate your life to the point that you do many, many unwholesome activities in your life. And we've probably all done a number of them. In retrospect, we think they were pretty, you know, kind of stupid. But our wisdom wasn't there then, you know, and this is the mind of attachment a lot of times. It's just, we have a lot of distortions and things. So that's kind of considering, one way of considering our body and our life. And then consider how how being generous, let's say, put it this way, consider how not being generous is the cause of conflicts with others. This one verse says, "As to living beings who dispute with others, it is tight-fistedness that is the root cause." And then another translation said it's attachment to oneself that is the root cause. So renounce that which you crave. Eliminating this craving is the mantra. And so basically this is, you know, just the understanding that, you know, if we had a more generous mind, our lives would be more peaceful. We'd have less conflict. It's clear. I mean, just look around the world. People are fighting over grains of sand, you know, where they draw their lines between countries and all kinds of things. And then one other advantage of generosity is it helps to rid yourself from afflictions. And this, I was going to teach about that tonight because I've spent some time, so I just want to mention this teaching by Nagarjuna in the Chinese canon. He taught these one-line slogans about all of our major afflictions. There's like about 20 of these. And they're really quite useful. I've used them since they were taught on, and they're on our website. Venerable Chodron taught all these on October 18th, 2009 in a Sharing the Dharma Day. And what they said about these is that by doing these practices of generosity, they're all practices of generosity, but they all tie up with the different afflictions. So sometimes when I'm really confused, I just read through the whole list, try to decide which affliction is active. And then the antidotes that they give, I've found quite useful. I have always had a little difficulty with getting some antidotes to work. And so something about the way Nagarjuna goes about this seems to work for my mind. So I highly recommend these. But these are actually causes of enlightenment. So, you know, they're just not like, I kind of use them for my day-to-day life, but I hold out that, you know, because through doing these, you reduce your afflictions, then that leads you to nirvana. So that's the way to put it in the biggest context. So what they said, what Lama Tsongkhapa said about this, which I thought was really interesting, he said, if you stop the craving that conceives everything to be your personal property. I thought that was good. Then repeatedly condition yourself to the attitude of giving it away to others, you will be called a bodhisattva. All these things are yours. I have no pride that they are mine. I thought that was really wise. I thought, yeah, this is mine. It really gets me into a lot of trouble. And you have that conception when the craving mind is there. This is mine. It's my personal property. And if we take to mind these teachings on generosity, which even this part I'm going to talk to you tonight, that whole thing can be dispelled. So, someone who has this amazing thought repeatedly and emulates the qualities of the perfect Buddha is called a bodhisattva. So said the inconceivable Buddha, the Supreme Being. So this is about ridding yourself from the afflictions through generosity. And then also consider the benefit of it leads to full awakening. And this is the way that Lama Tsongkhapa took this from Shantideva's Compendium of Training. He said, "Thus my body and mind move on moment by moment. So why not trade it in for something priceless? For this impermanent body dripping filth, you obtain permanent pure enlightenment." So that's kind of the perspective that we want to have about our body. As Geshe Tekchok said, he said it more in reference to a precious human life. He said, and it always struck me, what's precious about this life is not like the egotistical things of what we can, who we are. It's what we can do with it. And that's the same kind of thing about the body. So then consider the usefulness of the body. If you were to let go of all of these four distortions, okay, we've got this mind of a bodhisattva and we're trying to progress in these bodhisattva deeds, so we've kind of like blasted through most of the four distortions, right? So think about this. This body devoid of self, perishing, without substance, suffering, ungrateful, and continually impure, is of benefit to others. Not to delight in this is unwise. So that's the thing, if we want to appreciate our circumstances, appreciate that we have this body, and put it in the right perspective of, taking care of it so we can continue to practice, but not kind of going into, overdoing it for comfort's sake and things like that. And then realizing that the main thing that we can do is we can be a benefit to others. And how that creates such a happy mind when we do that. If you just look at all of our, teachings on the self-centered thought and how miserable your mind is when it's dominated by that, and how your mind feels when you actually have the intention to benefit others, and how even when things don't go well, but if that intention is really strong, then you can be quite peaceful and happy with how things go, even though the results maybe didn't come out the way you wanted them to. So with this perspective on the body, let's see, he says, though you make much effort to care for your body which has no substance, you have to discard it. By sincerely giving it away to others, you fulfill many of your own and others' aims. So when you get to a point where these teachings really make sense to you, I think you'll come to a point where you say, I would be a fool not to train my mind like this. And you've probably had times in your own practice where you've had things in the Dharma where you've really said that to yourself. I know I have. That's how I moved here. I remember clearly saying, I would be a fool not to move here. And it was just like I'd thought it through, and that was my conclusion, even though I didn't know what was going to happen, how things were going to be. And I think these teachings would be just like this. So we have to really consider them and, spend some time with them so we can get to this place. So then whatever you do, as you have that kind of mind, you do whatever you can to produce this thought, to give away your body, your possessions, everything. Not saying that we're at that level right now, but the intention on the mental aspect, to train our mind that way. And by giving away everything, I pass from sorrow, so my mind reaches nirvana. As I have to give up everything at death, it's best to give it to living beings. So that's the perspective of like, why wait? What use is it going to be when you're gone? So now there's a few things about how the bodhisattvas train around material possessions, because how it's really interesting to see how generous you are when you then have to give something up. That's where the pedal hits the metal. So we use these kind of reasonings to train our mind so that we can let go of things. So it says that when you see that wealth is impermanent and great compassion spontaneously arises, you understand, based on good reasons, that your possessions stored at home belong to others. Not quite there yet, but here's the reasoning. So this, keep your mind in the mind of a bodhisattva. When you have developed this great compassion, then that mind will think that everything you have is suitable to be given to others, because you want to benefit them. And then in your dedications, we've mentally dedicated all these things already. And so in your mind, then you just let all the things you possess just become, they belong to others already. And you were just holding on to them we're just holding on to these things. This is how we are with our robe, our second robe. We have one robe that we own. Our second robe, not really ours. So we do the same thing with the body. It's something to be shared with others. And then when you can think like that, then when things come up, it's easier to say, okay, this belongs to them anyway. It's kind of like doing the mind training to let the mind let go. And then consider the fear that we have around possessions. So there's never fear from what has been given away. Now, if you don't give away freely, there is fear. But if you've truly given something from the heart, it's gone, and so you don't have any fear. But the things that you have at home, you still have fears about, like they might get stolen, or they need to be taken care of, they aren't good enough. Those kind of fears you'd never have because they're gone. And then they have verses talking about wealth. So by giving, you achieve happiness in future lives. Not giving brings suffering even in this life. Human wealth is like a shooting star. What is not given away will cease to exist. So, like you pull out your checkbook with all your numbers in it, and when you pass away, it's like, what good are all those zeros and ones and twos and all the digits? It'd be better to have given, and then you'd have something for the future. Wealth is not given as transitory and will be gone. By giving it away, it remains a treasury. Wealth of no value comes to have value when you strive to help living beings. So that's actually the real value of the wealth that we have. Because everything you accumulate is going to be consumed. It's just the way of impermanence. So as our bank accounts go down, we might as well, instead of just letting them, go down to zero, you might as well give some of it away. Even if you have very little, this way of thinking will make you want to give because you see that you're creating the causes for having things in the future. The wise praise giving wealth away. Childish persons like to hoard it. No wealth is kept by holding on to it. From giving it away, excellence always arises. So that'll be a training. Because doesn't fear come up when you think about that? It does for me. And then we talked about this a little bit, how afflictions will cease and also our suffering will cease. By giving, you no longer hold on to misery. Grasping is an ignoble path and produces the afflictions. So when we are grasping onto things, we're just creating all these afflictions. Those who practice generosity are on the best path, while its opposite is a bad path. I think we've kind of talked about that. So then they talk about this dedication of the dedications that we do, which we have done many times, and try to think about them a little bit more, and then the merit that we generate. So if you can dedicate from the depth of your heart all your roots of virtue, all of your merit, however great or small they are, and dedicate this to all beings for their happiness, for their benefit, both temporary and ultimate benefit, and then give something, even just mentally give something, you obtain merit related to each living being. And so then, when you think about the collection of merit, it's much easier to do. I think this is what Lama Zopa is always trying to teach us. you know, by making these extensive offerings. Just the amount of, because the beings are endless, the merit is endless. And we need, you know, to be thinking in this way to make our minds more receptive to the Dharma. And so, so in the Precious Garland, there's this quote about this. Were the merit of saying this to have physical form, it would not fit into universes as numerous as the grains of Ganges sand. So basically the merit is like huge, right? The Bhagavan said this, and there's a logic to it. The expanse of living beings is immeasurable. The merit of the wish to help them is the same. So as expansive as we can make our mind, that's how expansive it is for that. And then, I think these are, well, yeah, more Lama Tsongkhapa's words here. He's talking about when we're trying to generate and cultivate generosity, kind of how to, I guess these were maybe some of the pitfalls in a sense of, he said, don't hold on to companions or belongings if they prevent you from increasing your ability to give. Don't hold on to companions or belongings if they intensify your stinginess, or if they stop you from developing a generosity that you haven't yet developed, or if they weaken your inclination to give. And this is, I think, kind of a refinement of, for me, of the understanding of, like, when we think about kind of bodhisattvas, like, you kind of have in mind that you're always supposed to be giving, I guess. But what he said is that, he said, bodhisattvas give up all possessions that intensify the fault of stinginess, or that do not expand generosity, the deceivers that become an obstacle. So what he's saying there is, well, actually, the part of that I didn't make clear is that in this thing, he also said that you should not take on companions or accept gifts from others. You should not accept material gifts from others that will decrease your generosity. And that's kind of not the way, you know, I usually think of it when I think of how we're kind of taught. But he's saying that do not, you know, bodhisattvas, here's exactly, I guess this is Shantidev. No, I don't know what this is from, Compendium of Perfections. I don't know who wrote that. Bodhisattvas should not accept jewels, wealth, or even a kingdom if it would harm their generous attitude and obscure the path to perfect enlightenment. So that's kind of a discernment that we have to make in our own mind when it comes up to, you know, keeping our vows properly. So then as we go about this is why we have this verse from Shantideva that says, I will give away without a sense of loss my body and my resources, as well as all of my virtue from the past, present, and future, for the welfare of all living beings. So this is the verse that we are all pretty familiar with. And this is kind of a natural result of doing these kind of reflections where we look at the advantages and the disadvantages around generosity. As we are able to take delight in giving and really make that strong, then, and as we also look at the fears that come up and all the kind of unwholesome states of mind that come up around stinginess or being tight-fistedness, then, you know, it's kind of like just natural that our generosity will increase. So really it's just what to adopt and what to abandon. And the points that I think he gave mostly about this are just kind of all the things that we run into during our day, you know, all the different kind of situations that we get in. But then we have to be kind of realistic here, and, you know, so we want to give away our body, our resources, and our roots of virtue, and we do this mentally right now, and we're taught that we have to practice where we're at and then create the causes for the future. Because right now, if we're not mature in this, we're not strong enough to actually give away our body. That's the instruction and the training. So we just do this mentally at this point until you have really trained your mind fully. And then he talked about the kind of commitments that we have, which Venerable talks about this, and I think I haven't always made them so consciously, so it's been helpful for me to think about this. Because we've made these dedications many times, and some of us have taken maybe the Bodhisattva vow, and we make various kinds of dedications around giving away things. When we are using things, then we should consider the commitments that we've made, those of us who have made commitments, so that when we're using food and clothes and shelter, that we've sincerely given away to all beings, that we're just using. So we have to think about how we're using them, and this is, I think, really good training here to, think about with this, if we're forgetting that I will use them for others' welfare, and we have more of mind that's full of craving for our own welfare, then he says that we've committed a major infraction. But if we've just forgotten to focus on living beings, or if we sometimes use resources for a particular individual out of attachment, like, which sometimes, we've had trainings about, giving things specifically to one person because we're attached to them, is what they're referring to here. That's also like a minor infraction. So these are the kind of commitments that some of us have made, and so we want to keep that mind of like, these don't belong to me, I've given them away, and I will use them for others' benefit. So then he goes into the kind of qualms that we might have about this. And so some people might think that to mentally give everything away while not actually giving things away is like a big lie, right? It's without any substance because it's just all like a fantasy, right? And so Shantideva responds to that qualm, and he says some people who are close to a bodhisattva who's practicing in this way, they've not really understood what their person's doing. They aren't seeing it accurately, and they aren't holding it with the right kind of faith or conviction. And they just say, just look, this is quite unwarranted. If you're well acquainted with someone and you see that they have this great, wonderful spirit of generosity, then that will clear your doubt about this method. And so it's kind of like saying, take a second look, because there is that thought that comes up like, what's the point of this? It's all just mental. You're not doing anything. But I've had that thought come up, and I've heard it from others many times. Like, you Buddhists, you're not out there doing things. Well, they don't really advertise a whole lot. I think Buddhists are doing many things very actively in the world, and they also are taking time to cultivate. So to have the mind that, just because it's not useful. I mean, look at the results of what we're seeing. See people who have cultivated these kind of mind states, and then they're actually able, when the situations come up, to do amazing things. And that's, I think, the reality there. So that's kind of my attempt to understand some of this part of this chapter from Lama Tsongkhapa. And so we want to think about how we can use these things in our daily practice and in our life, and then try to look at the things that get in our way and practice where we're at, and just kind of watch our minds around this, and then see how we can learn to have this kind of delight. It's quite nice when it happens, so may we do this for all beings. That's all I have to share. If anyone has any comments or questions, else we'll just dedicate. Okay, so let's make a dedication then. And then next week we'll talk about ethical conduct.
Due to this
merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig, may you stay until samsara ends.
May the
spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the light of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous action spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lopsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Supreme Spiritual Leader, Omniscient King of the Shakyas, Motherly Tara, Supreme Bestower of longevity and wisdom, vast ocean assembly of sources of refuge, grant propitious here and now for a nectar of benefit and bliss to flow. With a clear mind of extensive learning gained from following the wondrous traditions of Tupten, the Able One's teachings, you bring clarity to masses of disciples with the light of children, the lamp of the Dharma. May your lotus feet remain unfaltering for a very long time. Through your dharmic deeds of hearing, thinking, meditating, and so on, place those who seek the liberated path in harmony through immaculate discipline. Please lead all beings to liberation with undeclining excellent qualities of scripture and insight, and establish them in the glory of eternal bliss.
May the
deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the West, flourish.